Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Good Food Panel. I'm Martha Dragich from the Law School, your moderator for this afternoon. Is the sound level okay? No? Okay, I haven't said anything important yet. All right. So, this is I'm beginning to feel like a broken record. I say the same thing every week. But I see at least a few new faces, so I'll repeat at least part of what I've said. Just to orient you to what we're trying to do here. This is part of the university's Mizzou Advantage initiative around food for the future. So thinking about what kind of a food system is it that we would like to envision and try to help build for the future. That's a big thing to get our minds around. So a group of us started by talking about a study that had been funded by the Kellogg Foundation that settled on the following 4 attributes as key attributes of a good food system. That would be a system that produces food that is healthy, affordable, fair, and green. So that sounds good. The trouble is those terms are not self-defining. We don't all agree about what they mean. So if we're really going to get anywhere, we need to flesh those out a bit. And that's what we're trying to do. So each week we've taken one of those attributes. We've already talked about healthy food. Last week we talked about affordable food, and I think we're beginning to get the hang of it as we go along. We had a really rich discussion last week, and I hope the same will be true this week. Some of the questions that came up last week around the issue of affordability led us right into notions of fairness, so maybe we'll see some synchronicity between last week's panel and today's, I hope. Next week, we'll talk about the green aspects of food. And then the final panel on Tuesday, October 22nd, at this same time, I'm not sure in which room, will be a wrap-up to try to piece back together. So we took that concept from the Kellogg study and sort of took it apart, and now we're, in the last panel, we'll try to see what we can learn when we try to add those elements back together again. So that's our plan. What we hope to get out of this is some insight about where we have common ground and where we do not have a shared understanding around these concepts. And our thought is that in the areas where we do not have shared understanding, we can figure out what questions are out there to be researched, how might we adapt our teaching through curriculum development or new approaches or whatever, and what kinds of outreach efforts might be appropriate to start trying to fill in some of those gaps. So we ask for your help in the following way, which is to fill out any thoughts, questions, ideas, comments you have on that handout that you picked up on the way in, and turn it back in on the way out, and we'll keep track of those and factor that into our attempt to figure out these researchable questions and so forth. All right. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's panel. We have 4 panelists. Each one will speak for just a few minutes. We have planned sort of a rapid-fire presentation in which each panelist will give us a definition of what is fair food, and elaborate a bit on that definition, but not go too far into it. Rather, we'll save as much time as we possibly can for audience participation, questions and answers, discussion amongst the panelists, and so forth. So, today's panel, we'll hear first from Harvey James. Harvey is Associate Professor of Agribusiness Management. Harvey is followed by Larry Brown, retired Assistant Professor of Geography, then Rachel Gordon of the MU Extension Family Nutrition Program, and finally Bill Folk, Professor of Biochemistry. Your handout indicated that Erin Hawley of the law school would speak. She unfortunately is ill and not able to be here today. So, but I'm sure these 4 will have plenty to enlighten us about and get us started. So without further delay, I'll turn to Harvey.
Good afternoon. I'm very grateful to be here to talk with you. Question about definition. What is fair food? Food is fair, and I'll read this as I have it written. Food is fair when the production and consumption of food is consistent with or conforms to expectations of what, how, and why food is produced and consumed. And the main part I want to focus here is expectations. When our expectations are not met, we typically say that's not fair. So I guess now the real question is how do we form our expectations, particularly about what food is? And the problem is that there are no common, there's not a common understanding about where these expectations come from. Interestingly, if you Google fair food, particularly in the images, what do you get? You get funnel cake and corn dogs and so forth. So there's one version of what fair food is. Some perspectives. Our ability to determine or assess fairness actually develops quite early. Researchers have identified, some researchers said, as early as 4, maybe younger. Perceptions matter a lot. Way people see things are going to be different, and so I may see something as fair and have a good reason why it's fair. You may see the very same thing, but from your particular perspective, and the way you create your expectations, that will give you a different assessment. And we also have to recognize that emotions matter. When we're talking about fairness, it's not just a rational thought, but very typically our emotions come into play, and so we cannot discount the role of emotions. When we're talking about fairness, there are a variety of perspectives that come. One is that typically we think about fairness from an ideal. So we establish what an ideal is, and if that ideal is not met, then we say it's not fair. Or we might think about the system itself, or the process, or the institutional environment. Is that environment fair by some particular standard and expectations? If you're not, we might want to talk about why it's not and what we can do differently. And others focus on on a comparative evaluation, looking at what the various outcomes are, and maybe ask the question, can we make things a little more fair than they are right now? We're dealing with a wicked problem in the sense that it's really hard to identify what the correct solution is, and we can even get to a correct solution. And anything that we try to do to make the system more fair is going to upset some people. So can we do something? Well, hopefully we can. If there are tensions that are pulling it apart, can we identify some common ground, at least something that will allow us to create some expectations, common expectations. So what I like to do is just briefly identify what I would consider 6 principles of fairness. Things that we can think about to make the system more fair, or assess the extent to which it's not fair. The first is fair means people should be able to choose how they participate in the food system. The ability to choose comes before anything else. We can have all the food in the world, it can be affordable, it can be available, but if people do not feel that they are able to choose for whatever reason, then we have to ask ourselves, is the system fair? So autonomy and respect for persons is very important here. The second principle is that fair means people should be adequately informed about food and the food system. Transparency is absolutely essential. But being informed is a two-way issue. It's a two-way, we think about it from 2 ways. One, people need to seek out information. So you can choose not to be informed. Well, if you choose not to be informed, you really can't say this is, something's not fair, because you're not doing what you need to do to get information. On the other hand, those who are communicating information need to ensure that what is being communicated is fair. So you need to know what you're eating. Do you know what the picture is? It's ground beef, right? That's a close-up, macro picture of ground beef. All right, so do you know what you're eating? You need to be informed about some things, right? It's transparency, very important. Fair means means what people gain should be at least a value of what they give up. Most of the time when we participate in the food system, when we're talking about fair, our participation is in a market. some element of market. There's some element of cooperation. And so we need to make sure that people feel that they are getting some value. And I emphasize the word feel rather than believe, because when we're talking about value, it's a subjective assessment. And that subjective assessment means that it's going to engender or involve some element of emotion. And so, anytime we talk about fairness, we need to think about the extent to which people believe they are getting value. The next rule, fair means rules should apply equally. There should be no unequal treatment. But if we believe that there should be unequal treatment, we have to give a good reason. Is there a good reason why the rules are not being applied fairly? Okay, I'll pick on agricultural subsidies. I think a lot of people seem to agree that it's not fair that one particular commodity gets subsidized and another agricultural commodity does not. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask, is that fair? Another principle of fairness, any harm that is created should be minimized. And fair means we should try to internalize costs that our participation in any facet in the food system is creating. We know agriculture, food creates some strain. We definitely need some good science to identify where these strains are and to recommend solutions. But any effort that we can make to internalize costs, wherever those costs are, and make sure responsibility is placed on those who are creating costs, we need to move in that direction. And finally, fair means people are entitled to eat. And I think we need to accept the fact that food is a right. People have to eat. And so then the question is, what are we going to do about it? Peter Singer, in a famous essay 11 years ago, said the title of the essay is "The Bread which you withhold belongs to the hungry." He said that most people in the developed world have a superabundance. Now, I accept what he's trying to do, but his particular argument is that any time we have a superabundance, we need to give of that superabundance. And if we're not giving of that superabundance, it is wrong. That's probably too strong. I don't want to compel that. It goes against the principle of autonomy or make people feel guilty. But I think if we give information and we invite people to participate in health, we can see a lot of good that comes. So wrapping up, these principles are important: autonomy, transparency, value, equality of rules, internalization of costs, right to food. And I think if we can figure out ways to incorporate these principles, we can make the system more fair. Thank you very much.
My magnetic personality, I think. I'm Larry Brown, the Department of Geography. I've been teaching here at university for 23 years. And in the human side of geography, the qualitative side of geography, or the humanities side of geography for the most part. In the discipline of human geography, fair, I think, means food that is produced, that is distributed, and is consumed equitably, justly, and with respect to balanced cultural, political, and economic interests. And by equitable, I mean equal treatment. You've all probably seen this little iconic image of the difference between equality and equity. So we're talking equity, giving folks the same starting position. Then you can be equal. And that is a factor of justice, and by justice I mean distributive justice, not, as we often hear in popular media, retributive. This is the way that folks get the access to and therefore can share equally. Or this handy little memory device sometimes used, freely given access with integrity and responsibility for all. So when we look at it as human geographers, we are looking at, again, equitable distribution. But just a little reminder of the position of geography from which I come. Geography is about location, about spatial distribution of all sorts of activities, Sometimes we joke about geography being the mother of all discipline because it's the whole earth, because we are dealing with the characteristics of place that are both human and naturally a part of the world. We use often the term human environmental interaction, and it's an integrative discipline. So there's a little bit of lots of sciences and humanities and other perspectives that are wrapped up in geography. We try to look at the whole system, including, in particular, in my background, the more qualitative aspects of geography, the cultural systems of religions. So when I'm teaching the geography of world religions, or previously as I was teaching in religious studies, we are looking at stories, at behaviors and community, various aspects of religion, which are going to again incorporate the meaning of fair food. So in the framework of being equitable, just, and balanced, fair food in most religious cultural systems, moral perspectives, does indeed favor the poor. Share some of that perspective of what Harvey was saying, that food is one of the means by which wealth is equalized, power is equalized, status is equalized, and religions often are used then to condemn those who would hoard any of those aspects and turn around the systems to share. A measurement often in religions will be how are the least of these in society doing. That's a measure of the quality of society. Food winds up being a human right, or in religious language, it is sacred. And so the giving of bread and water, the giving of nourishment and hospitality become the sign of whether the system is just and equitable. I offer 7 sort of arenas of thinking about fairness from these perspectives: access, quantity, quality, profitability, labor control, and appreciation of culture. So to ask the question about, is it fair in terms of access of production, geographers, and particularly human geographers, would say, do folks have access to the land, to the tools, to the seed, to the stock, to the things they need to produce food? Do they have a part of that choice? And we're facing, of course, across the planet, the same particular plot of land may be used for food, for human consumption, or feed for animals, or forage, or fiber, or fuel, or other kinds of things. It may be compatible or not with urban development, with industry, with infrastructure, with the harvesting of mineral resources. So we're looking in every case, what degree of multiple use is possible? Is it a fair use of what's available there in and on the surface of the earth? Secondly, the question of fairness has to do with the quantity of food. Do human beings have enough? If indeed there is surplus, how is that surplus distributed? Could it be through trade? But that amount of food needs to be evaluated in terms of, is it secure, is it reliable, is it dependable? It would not be fair to have that food and then have it taken away. A third arena of fairness that we would ask would be the quality of food. As we looked at in our very first panel in this series about, is it nutritious? Is it both in its production and its consumption healthy and safety? But as geographers, we keep looking back again at the human-environmental interaction and saying, well, is it also healthy and safe for the whole system, for the environment, for the soil, for the water, for other aspects of life? The forest, the field, and whatever we might determine is natural. A fourth arena is profitability. And this again comes back to both producers and consumers, is a choice whether or not to make a profit. We might ask, it could be possible for subsistence to be the positive value. It doesn't have to be a profit. Orientation to mass consumption. One might choose not to participate in that system. And the social links might indeed be that of bartering. Food may be building community rather than generating additional economic value. A fifth area is labor. We'd say, what is the value of the producer, of the worker? How are they treated? Under what conditions? A question of fairness is, for whom and for what is this labor? Control, political decisions. Who gets to decide who owns the land and therefore who gets to make those decisions? Now, this is a question that's been going on from ancient empires to the very present. But we are in the position now in the world that an individual village might have just as much to say about that production as any global agribusiness. And the last, and I think from a human geography point of view, perhaps one of the most important is how food is valued. This tags on a bit with what Harvey was saying. For food might be considered sacred. Food may be the symbol of the relationship with the whole. Food is used in symbolic acts. At the point of harvesting, slaughtering, cooking, eating, it may be the connection to family and community. Food may be the ethnic or national identity for a person, for a family, for a whole country. So one asks, is it fair if they have to grow that when that does not fit? I mean, you could say it sort of facetiously. If I was in it for economics, I probably wouldn't set up a ham and cheese fast food shop in Jerusalem. That would not be out of respect, but it also wouldn't work. So there's a degree of honoring traditions that's present. Or to say it another way, it might be equally immoral to deprive, to starve, to poison, to do environmental damage, to do overconsumption, or to waste. These are all having to do with the valuing of food in whatever setting. Our choice may be to waste or to compost. Our choice will be to try to excerpt ourselves from the system or participate in it. So in summary, I would say fair food is food that's produced equitably and justly with this respect to balanced cultural, political, and economic interests. And I offered up these sort of 7 interlocking arenas. None of these questions of fairness can be used singly, but all in combination as the whole system. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Gordon. I work with the University of Missouri Extension. I am based in Kansas City, and I work on our projects that are called the Family Nutrition Education Programs. So we teach nutrition and physical activity to low-income Missourians. This program is statewide. I manage the greater Kansas City area. So I have 25 paraprofessional educators that go out in the community and teach nutrition and physical activity. So I'm going to approach fair food from a consumer standpoint in terms of the barriers that our participants face, as well as the things that we're trying to teach them to counteract. So in the discipline of extension, fair food means food that is accessible to all and easily understood by its consumers. So first I'm going to talk about some of the barriers to food accessibility in terms of when we're teaching people how to eat healthy and how to make good food choices. What are the real life issues that they're dealing with in order to actually access the food that we're talking about? So the first one is the big issue of food deserts. And I apologize for the grainy map. I went to USDA to get a better one, and as most of you know, we can't get anything off their websites. So this is kind of an idea of there are food deserts throughout the United States, and they define food deserts as no car and no supermarket store within a mile. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kansas City, but that is a huge issue in terms of what we face. I live just 2 blocks east of a street that runs north and south in Kansas City called Troost, that is kind of a divider between wealth and extreme poverty. And that 2 blocks east, when I drive down Troost every day to go to work, there are a lot of gas stations, and unfortunately all of the signs say EBT accepted, which means they accept food stamps in their stores. And there's a lot of people regularly walking to and from these stores purchasing food, because unfortunately there's no other food store within at least a mile of this corridor where I live in South Kansas City.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes.
Bring the mic closer.
Yes, I can. I will stand closer then. And the second part is, so say we're teaching how to access food and make these better choices, and there's no grocery store, and so we're going to talk about public transportation, and there are challenges with that also. I'm using my own city as an example, in that, you know, of course there's a fare associated with the bus, but there's also restrictions on how many bags that you can carry on a bus at any given time. And some of those things that we might not see as real issues for us, because I fortunately have a car and I don't have to worry about taking the bus to the grocery store, but the participants that we teach overwhelmingly do. So the second part is not only access to the food, but really understanding what the food is. So understanding where it comes from, what it does for our bodies, and how to even understand what products we're purchasing. So when we teach these classes, we try to point out to our participants that the food companies and the marketers are not concerned with what's in the food in terms of what they're getting for themselves, that they have to be smart consumers for their own selves. So something as simple as a loaf of wheat bread, which looks very unassuming, it looks like it's what you should be purchasing, but I can't see the label on this one, but I guarantee it's not 100% whole wheat. I find this, I get tricked in the grocery store as well, and I have to triple check the label to make sure I'm buying what I really intend to buy, and that the first ingredient on the list is actually whole grains, as opposed to the package that just says a whole grain food. And that it's not processed, and whole grain isn't the fifth ingredient, and enriched bleached flour is the first. So, and the other part with that is not only understanding what the food is, but understanding what to do with it, and that knowledge piece, and where do those who need to understand our food better, where do they get it? And we're one program, we're federally funded to provide nutrition education in the state. So some of the goals of our program is to bring the latest nutrition information to low-income Missourians, help them achieve lifelong health and fitness. Our paraprofessional educators work with clients in groups, in schools, and at low-income agencies. So we go to homeless shelters, food pantries, try to meet our clients where they are. And we do hire paraprofessionals in terms of, we hire from within the community that we're teaching. And these clients hopefully gain skills that pave the way for nutritional well-being and health for their lifetime. So some of the objectives of our program: to make these healthy food choices, increase food prep skills, increase knowledge and practice of food safety. I was talking about use a food label and a nutrition facts panel, and to be more physically active. So we are successful in some of these things that we set out to achieve. So overall diet improvement in all food groups, including increased fruit and vegetable consumption, planning meals in advance, improved shopping practices. Two of the ones that I think are most important in terms of what fair food really means is being able to stretch food dollars to last longer and run out of food less often at the end of the month. And so for every $1 spent to implement EF&EP, which is one of our funding sources, $2.48 is saved on food expenditures and reducing the need for emergency food assistance. So to look over kind of what I've talked about, to talk about the barriers to accessibility, not only in terms of the access, but also how to even get to the places where the food is, and the stores that are available not having choices that are consistent with what we're teaching them to be eating, as well as understanding the products, having the knowledge to make these better choices, and that nutrition education is a piece that can help kind of bridge some of these gaps, although, unfortunately I can't create opportunities to put grocery stores in neighborhoods that really need them. So I thought this kind of summed up pretty well these different pieces that I'm putting together. The issue of food literacy compounds the problems of purchasing power and access. If one doesn't understand what healthy versus unhealthy food is, then the informed purchase of good food is impossible. Okay, thank you.
So I'm Bill Folk. I'm coming to this panel more as a geneticist and biologist than as a biochemist. And I think what I'll have to say is probably a very good segue to the next panel's discussion. I chose this painting by one of my favorite artists, Thomas Hart Benton. Actually, it's somewhere on here, but I guess it disappeared in the slide. Because it links one definition of fair, which has to do with weather, and in this particular painting by Thomas Hart Benton, the weather does not look fair, with agriculture. Thank you very much, Martha. Which is the topic of our conversation, and particularly with production systems. So here's a choice that we have to make. Here on the left-hand side is Earth. We have approximately 8 million life forms or species on Earth. And here's the daughter of Earth, the Moon, with no known life forms. And the question is, on which of these would you prefer to live? And what is the difference between these? Because much of the content of the Moon is, in fact, exactly the same as the Earth, having been derived from the Moon, from the Earth. And the extremely important resource that we have on the Earth is life.
are the 8 million life forms. And so my pitch in this discussion really is that in any definition of fair, we really have to incorporate more than humanity. We have to include the other 7.999 million life forms that exist on this earth, on which we are dependent. And if we do not include that, then that will come back and diminish our lives, and in fact could well destroy our lives. So my postulates are that whether a food system is fair is really determined, in addition to some of the definitions that were described by the previous talkers, but also by its impact upon other humans as well as upon other species, the other species with which we share the earth, life on earth. And diminution of biodiversity, or the number of species, causes profound unintended consequences upon the lives of other humans, often in distant reaches of the earth, which were really, it may be very difficult to link immediately, but eventually we will begin to recognize. And so I'm going to describe 2 examples of this, but there are many more. So our intensive agriculture system is well known to reduce the biodiversity, or the mean species abundance. And this is a whisker plot of the mean species abundance of various types of land use, being one where there is no human use of land, and down here over on this side, intensive agriculture, which reduces the mean species abundance by about 90%. And other forms of agriculture are equally deleterious. Man-made pastures or agroforestry has less impact upon mean species abundance, but intensive agriculture really is extremely harmful to the species abundance of our earth. And over a long period of time, what that means is that we are diminishing the number of species and diminishing our lives. This is combined relative mean species abundance from the original species estimated using a variety of pressure factors, which include intensive agriculture. And up on this panel is year 2000, and the red indicates that the mean species abundance is about 1/10 or less of what it was originally before mankind settled this part of the earth.